Hi there. My name is Lynne Golding, and I am the author of the Beneath the Alders historical fiction series, a series of 3 books inspired by the life of my great aunt, Jessie Roberts Current. And I'm here with my daughter, Elexa Clement, the author of A Journey to Remember, an annotated, edited version of an actual diary of that same aunt. And for the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to tell you a little bit about how Alexa's book and my book series relate to each other, and about how Elexa came to write her book. Before we begin, I should tell you a little bit about the Beneath the Alders series. So it is comprised, as I say, of 3 books. The first is The Innocent, which takes place between 1907 and July 1914. The Beleaguered takes place between 1914 and 1918. And The Mending, the final book in the series, takes place between September 1918 and 1931. Now, in The Mending, the last book in the series, 2 chapters are devoted to a trip that the fictional character Jessie and her family took to Europe. I finished writing those 2 chapters in about February of 2020. And when I did, I realized that I had in my possession the actual diary that Jessie had of that trip. Now, I had written my chapters based on her recollections of that trip, given to me almost 80 years after it had occurred. When I realized I had the actual diary, I thought, goodness, I should check that to make sure that Jessie's recollections were correct. But when I opened it and saw how small the script was and how packed in it was into this diary, I realized I did not have the time to make my way through it. Enter Elexa, who I asked to transcribe it. Now, before we go further, there's one other thing I need to tell you. It's a bit of a spoiler alert. If you're the sort of person that can't enjoy a book if you know a detail about its ending, and if you have not yet read The Beleaguered and intend to do so, you may want to wait and watch this video a little bit later. So now let's get into this. So Elexa, let's, for posterity's sake, just have you record where you were and when I asked you if you would be willing to transcribe this diary.
Well, I had been called home from school in London, Ontario, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I was in Brampton, Ontario, when you asked me to write it. I had just finished my exams in April of 2020, and I didn't start work until June. So I had the month of May off. So you asked me, I believe, near the end of April, if I would be willing to spend the month writing it, and I happily took that up.
Now, was it a bigger job than you thought it would be?
I would say definitely. I enthusiastically took up the project because, first of all, I thought it would be fun and a way to go back to my history roots. I studied history in undergrad, so I thought it would just be very fascinating to read the journal from 1926. But on top of that, as I said, I thought it would be quick. I thought I could just do it in May, and then the project would be done. But as life would have it, it ended up taking me the entire summer, so 4 months, to go through and annotate it and research it and proofread it multiple times. So it ended up being a summer-long project, but I was okay with that because it was so fascinating for me to do.
And I am so glad that you did it because, as I suspected, Jessie's memory, while pretty good, wasn't entirely accurate. And there were some really great insights that I was able to pick up from your transcribed work that I was able to fit into the book before it went to publication. So that was really helpful. So what was any part of it difficult for you?
I would say that the most challenging part would definitely be reading her writing. It didn't help that her writing was mostly in pencil and in cursive. So I remember my first time reading it, there were so many words and phrases that I had no idea what they meant or what they were. But I would say as time went on, I got a lot more used to her writing. So when I went back over it, I figured out what a lot of those words and phrases were. And every time I reread it, another word or phrase would come to light. That being said, I didn't figure all of them out. And I invite my readers in the book that I published to let me know if they figure out some of these words or phrases, because in the end, I wasn't able to read them all.
Yeah, I think of one example. You had one place where you had written the word SANS, so French for no sang, and then T period B period. And I looked at that. Your father looked at it. Your grandmother. We did not know who TB was. She was without TB. Who was that? Anyway, our friend Colleen, when she read it, she immediately realized that that was short for a TB sanitarium. And she thought, how wonderful is it that people in our generation don't even know what those short form letters mean. So that is true. We've come a long way in our medical treatment. Now, I had asked you to transcribe it, and I'm so glad you went on to actually annotate it as well. But how did you decide what to annotate?
I was taught very early on in my undergraduate career that you should write essays in such a way that if an alien were to come to Earth and they read your essay, they would understand what was going on, having had no previous knowledge of the subject that you were writing about. So that's kind of how I approached the annotations. I started annotating historical sites and things that may seem very obvious to us today, but I wanted the diary to stand the test of time like it had, like Jesse's diary had for me. So I wanted my, annotation of it to also stand the test of time. So, for example, I annotated the Mona Lisa, and a lot of us know what the Mona Lisa is, but I wanted to make sure that anybody anywhere could pick it up and know what the Mona Lisa was. So I started by annotating just, the historical sites she saw, and providing context for what was happening in history at the moment in time. But then I went on to, also annotate things that were foreign to us in the 21st century. So for example, Jessie said that she skipped for hours. To me, that seemed a bit strange as a 23-year-old skipping. I didn't really know what that really meant, and I never actually figured it out, but I made sure to annotate that so that people knew that I had researched and looked into that and tried to figure out what exactly she was doing for hours on end at 23 years old. And then I also annotated the activities she took part in and the people that she saw so that it could connect to your book so people could know who she was with. And at the end of the book, it actually lists out the names of the people that she was with on the trip. So that was kind of a way to just help identify and string together the context of who she was with and who she saw.
Yeah, that was really very helpful. And I guess we can, I'd be very happy for Ancestry and other sorts of tools like that to help us identify some of those people, because we were able to get ship logs from some of those sites. So that was very helpful. What aspect of the project did you enjoy the most?
I would say I really liked, looking into the mind of a 23-year-old in 1926. So for starters, as I said, Jessie was 23 when she did this, and I'm 23 now. So I thought it was, a really nice and neat connection that I had to this journal, that we are the same age in such different eras, such different times of history. But, I loved reading about the trivial things that she did that us youths still do today. Like Jessie liked to shop. She drank, she danced. She even developed a crush on a boy she met on the boat on the way over, only for her friend to make a move and for her to feel that betrayal. And I thought that was, so funny that those kind of things still happen today with 23-year-olds that we think trivial. So that's something that I really enjoyed about it. I also really liked that, the sites she saw in Europe are the same sites that we still see today in the 21st century when we go to those places. So like I said, she went to the Mona Lisa, the Louvre, the Palace of Versailles, Buckingham Palace, the University of Oxford. And, these things have really stood the test of time. We still go to those places. And I myself have been to all of those places. So it was just amazing to think that, I stood in that same spot looking at Buckingham Palace as Jessie did, almost 100 years earlier. So, just as a history major, I found that fascinating. And just as a 23-year-old woman in the 21st century, I found it, really incredible to see that those things have stood the test of time.
I agree with you. It was really fun for me to listening to her 23-year-old voice. Alexa, you did know Jessie, but I knew her a lot longer. She was always an old woman to me. Even when I was a young child, I think of her age now. That's not really so old, but as a young child, I thought she was always a very old person. But certainly as I knew her, she was a mature person. So it was really fun to read her voice as a 23-year-old and realize that she wasn't always the wise counsel, right? She was once just, a fun-loving girl. So that was great for me too. Now, they went to Europe really for kind of a sad purpose. So I assume that some parts of the book were a little bit emotional. What do you think?
Yeah, I would definitely say, reading about interwar France in the interwar years, reading about the devastation that France, in particular, experienced during World War One, definitely spoke to me. She spoke of the absolute poverty that she witnessed and the buildings that had been bombed in the First World War. And I remember on her way to Jim's grave, she passed something like 161 cemeteries, which is just, unimaginable today. Like, I cannot even imagine what that was like to see those rows and rows of cemeteries and graves. And I remember she said that her tour guide saluted every single one of them, except for the graves that had black crosses, because those were German graves. So, it was emotional to, think about how much death and loss was experienced, and to read about the hostilities that still existed in the interwar period. And, just to hear about how these European countries were impacted by the First World War. Like, in studying history, there's all these great and big events that happened in a row in that time period. We have World War One, followed by the Depression, followed by World War Two. And it's hard to just, step back and think about how much loss of life actually happened and what it did for those communities in the First World War. And just hearing about it on a human level from her perspective, I think really just brought me down to earth and helped me to put things into perspective and to see, how devastating the war really was.
Yeah, I do agree with you. The numbers are staggering. It's hard for us to even imagine how
Mm-hmm.
many civilians and military lives were lost in that war. And certainly she did have a poignant entry about the entire day when they traveled to see the grave of her brother Jim. That's who the Jim was that Alexa referred to, who died in the third day of the Battle of Amiens and was buried in a place called Le Canal, just outside of Le Canal. And she describes the cemetery that he was in. It's a really beautiful little cemetery, and she refers to him as Jimmy Boy. And I didn't know that that's the way she referred to him, but I guess as a young person, he was much older than her, but she, I guess, had a pet name for him as Jimmy Boy, so that was kind of sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what about the vocabulary? Did you have any trouble with the vocabulary that was used at that time?
I would say for the most part, it was surprisingly pretty modern. There were a few words that I didn't really recognize. Although she did call a lot of people peaches, which I found interesting because I don't think I know anyone that calls anyone that. And, like, as you mentioned, the slang for a SAN for TB, meaning like a sanitarium for tuberculosis. I mean, that was a bit foreign to me, as you mentioned. But for the most part, it was pretty modern language.
Yeah, that I agree with you. There weren't too many words that I didn't recognize when we went through it. Now, I'm just showing everybody the picture of Alexa's book. And Alexa, you've got some photographs on here. Are you able to tell people about them?
Yeah, so those are actually photos from the trip itself. When we were thinking of what the cover would be, we thought to ourselves, how great would it be to actually show the photos from when they went on that trip to make it so tangible so you could see what the people actually look like at the time while you're reading it. So yeah, those are photos from the trip.
So this one up here is Jessie and her mom looking out over the sea as they're traveling. And this is a picture of Jessie's friends rented bicycles when they were in Amsterdam. So that's what that's from. And this is a picture of a bunch of the people on the ship. We don't know who they were. And as I look back on it, the picture is somewhere in Holland. I can't remember whether it was Amsterdam for sure. So then, having helped me so much by transcribing the book and then annotating it, you decided to self-publish it. So was that hard?
It was surprisingly very easy. I would encourage anyone who's thinking about self-publishing to just go ahead and do it. Amazon, holds your hand kind of and walks you through the process. It was, very easy to just read through the steps, a bit time consuming, and then just self-publish it. But I would say, the biggest reward for me, or the most rewarding experience of it, was just having this idea in May and just working through it and seeing it come through to fruition, to be published on Amazon forevermore, hopefully, and just having it there so that other people can experience what I experienced in reading Jesse's diary.
Well, I'm so glad that you did that, Alexa. And I have to say, it's a real treat for me that you and I can appear on this Zoom panel that we have together and talk about our common books, our common heritage, and really Canadian history, because that's what these books are about. They're about life in Canada about a century ago, mostly in small town Canada, but also, as you can tell, the characters tread a little further afield as well, including to Europe. So thank you, Alexa, for joining me on this Zoom video.
Thank you for having me.
Goodbye, everyone.